Hello and welcome to A Deeper Dive with Dara Cam. Today, I am going to take a deep dive into higher education in Florida with a special guest, Lynn Pasquerella, president of the American Association of Colleges and Universities. We're going to talk about CRT, intersectionality, New College of Florida, professor tenure, a whole lot of stuff going on here. You don't want to miss it.
You're listening to A Deeper Dive with Dara, a podcast by City and State, Florida.
Hello and welcome to A Deeper Dive with Dara Cam. That is me, and today we are very excited to have a special guest with us, Lynn Pasquerella. She is the president of the American Association of Colleges and Universities. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
And we will be talking about, guess what? Higher ed, folks, because guess what? Florida is a hot mess of higher ed controversy right now, and probably will be for the next short while. So there's a lot of ground to cover here. Lynn, is it okay if I call you Lynn? Dr. Pasquerella?
Of course.
Okay.
Yes.
Let's start with the legislation that kind of was the impetus for a lot of what's going on right now. Last year, the legislature passed the Stop Woke Act, which lists a series of race-related concepts and says it would constitute discrimination if students are subjected to instruction that, quote, espouses, promotes, advances, inculcates, or compels, unquote, them to believe the concepts. There's been a lot of that law is being challenged in 4 different lawsuits right now, at least. There's been a lot of there's been a tug of war over what that really means. As it turns out, people were saying it means we can't talk about slavery. As it turns out, the governor and the Florida education leaders are now targeting diversity, equity, and inclusion programs and services on campuses. So I mean, it's a lot. I'm sort of rambling, but these are interlocking pieces of the same concept. I'm curious to know what your thoughts are about Florida's approach and what the higher education world outside of and inside of the state is saying, because they're not speaking out loud too much in Florida right now, I can tell you.
Well, Florida's certainly not alone in terms of the kind of what we term educational orders that are being put in place. There has been a flurry of legislation targeting so-called divisive concepts, discussions of critical race theory, in some states, reproductive rights. And our concern is that our nation's historic mission of educating for democracy is dependent upon the free and unfettered pursuit of the truth. And when certain perspectives, points of view, topics of conversation are proscribed, then that erodes the very foundations of American higher education, academic freedom, shared governance, and our ability to create and generate knowledge.
It seems like part of the attack, when you're talking about concepts like slavery and racism, and, we can talk about what CRT is in a moment, but these are topics that make people feel uncomfortable. There are things that happened in our history that make people feel uncomfortable, and it's okay to feel uncomfortable, isn't it?
It is. And it might even be an imperative to make people feel uncomfortable with respect to their views. Liberal education, which is really at the heart of American higher education and what makes it distinctive, is premised on the notion that people need to be freed from their past dispositions and consider the possibility that some of their most fundamentally held beliefs might actually be mistaken. And to do that, we have to open our minds, be engaging in moral imagination, imagining what it's like to be in the shoes of another different from oneself. This can make people feel uncomfortable, and yet it's what will help people adopt the critical thinking skills, the dispositions necessary to thrive in work, citizenship, and life.
So, what are people saying about what's happening in Florida? Are we an outlier? You said that this is not the only state, but it seems to me, maybe I'm just so centrally focused on Florida. I mean, we'll talk about let's talk about the AP African American Studies course
Mhm.
that the state ixnayed. We've got the Stop Woke law. We've got the reshaping of the higher education system in general to reflect conservative Republicans' ideology. I mean, that's really what's happening.
Mhm.
We've got the dismantling of New College. All of this happening in a very short period of time. Are educator or leaders like yourself in around the country paying attention to this?
Yes, there's a great deal of concern. All of the topics you mentioned um, are critically important to us, but also the attack on accreditation, the fact
Yes.
that when these issues have been raised about academic freedom and shared governance, there's a seemingly retributive approach in saying, well, then we're going to make you switch accreditors so that these issues that are being highlighted around conflict of interest, the appointment of people, the erosion of tenure and promotion, then aren't raised by this body. And so that has a chilling effect. People are afraid of retribution. They're afraid that if they do what they believe is right, then they'll be attacked, they'll be fired. And so yes, it's of concern. It was of concern to many leaders in higher education that the presidents of state community colleges and four-year publics came out against critical race theory and talking about divisive concepts and vowed that they wouldn't push an ideological agenda that included that. I don't know of any institution in the US that is a nonprofit liberal education institution that pushes an ideological viewpoint around race and gender in ways that are being outlined in this legislation.
Well, the way that the leaders in Florida, the ones who crafted the legislation, and Governor DeSantis, I mean, I'll just call it, the way that they characterize CRT and intersectionality is mistaken. I mean, it seems to be misleading, to put it kindly. Can you talk about, I mean, when they say that they're brainwashing kids into a certain kind of dogma, Marxism, he equated intersectionality with Marxism, the governor did the other day. I mean, maybe we start by explaining that what CRT is and intersectionality is, and how this is or isn't it pushing a certain ideology.
Yeah, so there's a lot that leads up to this moment. In the during the Reagan administration, when he was governor of California, there was a challenge to higher education as a public good, and there was a shift toward viewing it as a private commodity. And he famously said when the protesters at Berkeley were protesting the war and issues of social justice, we're not going to use taxpayers' money to fund these people. For their intellectual curiosity. Education is all about preparing people to get jobs, fueling the economy. And so that has been a prevailing national rhetoric, this shift away from the notion of the public purposes of higher education as a public good, to viewing it as a private commodity, has coincided with state disinvestment in higher education. And now there is a rhetoric which suggests that higher education is too expensive, too difficult to access, doesn't teach people 21st century skills, or that colleges and universities are bastions of liberal
Mm.
progressivism, brainwashing the next generation of snowflakes to melt at the slightest abrasion of their sensibilities. So when
I love the way you put that. I'm
Right.
sorry, I don't mean
Well,
to
so
laugh. I mean, it's quite,
yes.
yeah.
So in 2016, when President Trump became president, he reinforced this narrative and passed legislation that was intended to protect conservative speech against what he saw as the chilling effect on the part of liberals. And so all issues were on the table, except when President Biden became president and vacated those orders, then state legislators, governors started taking up where President Trump left off.
Okay.
And Governor DeSantis has been leading the charge in terms of going against the very premise that Trump's legislation was built upon. Um, if all ideas should be available to students, because we don't want to um, buy into this notion of students as snowflakes, then why are we all of a sudden chilling liberal ideas? We couldn't chill conservative ideas, and legislation was passed to prevent that. But now we're passing legislation to chill liberal ideas. And so there is some irony and certainly hypocrisy in what's happening. And the issue about critical race theory is a red herring. I taught critical race theory for 2 decades. The notion of systemic racism is not something that we introduce in primary and secondary school classrooms, and yet the notion of parental control was used to bolster arguments against critical race theory. You're teaching children that all whites are racist and that all people of color are oppressed. That's wrong. I don't know anybody who's teaching that either at a primary or secondary school level or in higher education.
Right.
We're looking at the impact of structural racism uh, and unveiling the truth that the history books we learned from said that with the civil rights movement, there was an end to segregation. There was the protection of voting rights for all people, and that everyone had equal opportunity. We know that's not the case.
It's fixed.
Segregation is
It's we
everything.
the lie is that we fixed it.
That's right. We're in a post-racial era. We're
Right.
certainly not. And we've seen this when we see it over and over again um, with what's happened with police brutality against African Americans, with other issues of racial and
Redlining,
social
yeah,
justice.
redlining, I mean, Wells Fargo paid a big chunk of money after they discriminated against African Americans in lending. The U.S. Department of Agriculture paid millions and millions of money of dollars to black farmers for discriminating in lending practices back in the 70s. Yeah, so I mean, racism exists. I think the concept that the notion that we know that we are in a post racism world in the United States is just, it's patently false.
That's right. So we saw with the public lynching, the murder of George Floyd, but also the disparately negative impact of COVID-19 on communities of color, where
Right.
African Americans, Native Americans, uh, Latinx individuals were dying at 5 times the rate of whites, that there are still issues of systemic racism that need to be addressed. And so to say that students in high school in AP, African American Studies, can't learn about these issues because it's liberal propaganda is a disservice to them. It denies them equal opportunity to excellence in education.
The CRT is a complicated topic. You taught it. Can you kind of tell us what the truth is? I think you really did summarize, but the country, we were built from a time of slavery. So, and there's been a lot of pushback to the 1619 project, but to the can you explain to us, to our listeners, they're a sophisticated bunch, but try to flesh out a little bit what CRT really is, and if there's a way to counter the message that the people like the governor and opponents of teaching this concept in higher education are spreading in terms of the misinformation.
CRT was a curriculum that was designed to be used in law schools that show that discrimination, the legacies of white supremacy and slavery in our country go beyond what happens to individuals as a result of other individual interactions, but extend to systemic and structural issues, the way in which the courts have negatively impacted communities of color. We talked about health, so the way that education systems, health systems, issues of environmental racism when you're putting toxic dumps in poor communities of color. And so it's nothing more than that we have to look beyond individual acts of racism to the ways in which institutional and organizational structures impact communities.
And intersectionality, that's the thing that the governor called Marxist the other day.
Yeah, so issues of race, class, gender, heteronormativity are intersecting, and they impact the positionality, the way in which people look at the world, their lived experience. So much of critical race theory focuses on, what Derek Bell talked about as voices from the bottom of the well, the perspective that you have in looking at society. I don't think that any amount of reason or argumentation is going to persuade those who believe the narrative around critical race theory. The people who came up with this woke anti-CRT rhetoric have admitted, we know that this isn't really what's going on in the schools, but we know it will resonate with people who want history to be taught the way they learned it, who want parental control, who don't want their kids going into a classroom in high school to talk about reproductive rights or LGBTQ issues. We want to be able to control that. So those are the real fears, and I don't think we should minimize them. Those are genuine concerns of individuals. But in this post-truth era, kinship and presenting points of view that resonate with the groups that you're talking to are what matter most.
It's like what happened to the news when there was a time when Walter Cronkite, kids look him up, Google him, was the most trusted man in the country. And now people only seek out news outlets that support what they think they already know or what they believe.
That's right. And I think about how quickly people turn on those their most trusted allies. So remember when President Trump and Lindsey Graham came out to audiences and encouraged them to get COVID-19 shots. They were booed, they were shouted down. And Trump quickly recognized this and backtracked and said, well, it's up to you. It's your individual right. I'm just telling you, you should get this.
Yeah.
So even when you are part of the group, if you communicate a message that doesn't comport with the way people want to live their lives, then you're going to be rejected. And so I think we're bound to lose if we try to engage in reasoned debate over these issues. Instead, we have to be visible in the communities we're trying to serve and demonstrate why it's important that children K through 12 and college students are exposed to the broadest range of ideas that will help us move forward and find common ground.
We'll be right back with Lynn Pasquerella, president of the American Association of Colleges and Universities.
Here at Deeper Dive, we want to hear from you, the listeners. We invite you to send your questions, comments, and feedback to our mailbag. You can reach us at deeperdive@cityandstatefl.com. That's deeperdive@cityandstatefl.com. Get your 2 cents in by sending us an email.
Welcome back to A Deeper Dive with Dara. What happens if we have this seismic shift in how history is taught in Florida that a lot of folks are concerned is going to happen? What do the kids who are getting educated now, what do they look like 20 years from now?
Well, it will certainly be a disservice to those students who are denied access to the pursuit of the truth. And it will also impact teachers who are willing to teach in the state in K through 12, but certainly professors, researchers who are willing to teach at public institutions in the state of Florida and elsewhere where there's similar legislation.
Right. Yeah, I was mentioning to you that I've had some political science professors, tenured political science professors, calling me and off the record and saying, they're very concerned about these changes to tenure that Florida is now adopted, and I think going further with where that the president of the university could lose control over hiring and firing tenured professors, and that would be left up to board of the board of trustees who are appointed by the governor. I mean, that is a frightening prospect to many of the people who have tenure now and who are afraid to speak out about it because, as you said, there's retribution, and there's kind of, what do they do if they have young kids, if they can't leave the state, they're kind of stuck here. So I wonder if we're going to see some sort of brain drain. The governor, on the other hand, says this approach is going to draw people to Florida. What are your thoughts about that?
I think the governor's probably wrong about that proponents of these legislative efforts are seeking to substitute political mandates for the judgment of professional educators. And that contempt for expertise and the academic enterprise is likely to dissuade folks from saying, I want to go work in that state. Because if you know that your research might lead to your being fired or denied tenure because it's not deemed politically correct, then that's an enormous disincentive for going to work in a state that has that cultural norm.
Let's talk about the College Board's Advanced Placement African American Studies course. There were a number of items in that curriculum that they did not want Florida high schoolers exposed to. The College Board actually, and then when the College Board changed its curriculum because it was a pilot program, the governor and his supporters took a victory lap and said, yay, us. And it actually turns out that the College Board issued a statement, I read it the other day, saying, no, you guys are playing, politics with us, and this was a political stunt all along. You didn't really engage. So, we're not, you didn't make us change. And then the governor said, and this goes to your point about accreditation, which we'll get to next. Oh, well, maybe we don't need the College Board. We don't need the SATs. And, it's kind of like with President Trump. Covering Governor DeSantis is very similar in that way, where you think, every day there's some new bombshell. But that one was kind of gobsmacking because I mean, doing away with the SATs would be just unheard of until the governor said we can find some other way to do it. So, thoughts? I don't even know what the question would be here, but thoughts on dissociating from the College Board and coming up with a different exam for students, or the whole kerfuffle over the AP African American Studies course?
Well, there's so
It's a
much
lot.
to
I know.
unpack.
It's a lot.
I
Smorgasbord. Pick.
so um, I don't think that standardized tests, SATs, are the best measure of academic excellence or potential. They've been shown to be racially, class, gender biased, and
That's
so
not, let's just,
I
a
wouldn't.
side note, that's not why the governor is objecting to them.
That's right. And again, it seems retributive to say, the College Board has come out against my position and has criticized me, and so we don't really need the College Board. Everyone should have equal access to educational opportunity in the state. AP African American history, the curriculum itself is valuable. Um, I think the governor was wrong to push for the erosion of that curriculum in ways that eviscerated it, eliminated any discussion of systemic racism, Black radicalism, Black feminism, intersectionality, because those are critical issues to understanding the history and legacies of racism and white supremacy in this country. So we should ensure that all students have access to learning about American history. This is American history. It's not African American history and American history. There's one history. And so he's worried that the curriculum causes divisiveness, but failing to include this as part of a curriculum, I think, promotes divisiveness.
Well, I was just going to ask you about that. Not only failing to include it as part of the curriculum, but also, demonizing it. That's, to me, I mean, I wonder if that isn't even more divisive than just the dropping of the course, the way that they've painted this as Marxist, or as attacking our culture, being unpatriotic. I mean, that I wonder what if that isn't creating more racial division in a country where we already are seeing an uptick in that sort of a behavior.
And that's right. The notion that teaching something would somehow be un-American is itself seems un-American, since we do support the free exchange of ideas.
Well, yes, we do. And so let's talk about the accreditation issue.
It was so the Southern Association of Colleges,
Yes.
Schools and Colleges, SACS, is an accrediting body that did raise concerns when the Florida government said certain faculty couldn't testify in court on certain issues, when there was concern over the appointment of campus leaders without faculty, staff, and student input, and other concerns around issues of shared governance and academic autonomy and integrity.
The state has not severed ties with that accreditation organization yet, but the idea that there may be, again, as you say, chilling effect. I don't know. I hate to be so repetitive, but I'm not really sure there's a better way of articulating it.
There will be a chilling effect. The legislation that was proposed mandated switching accreditors every 5 years. The accreditation cycle is 10 years. You have to apply for accreditation with different accrediting bodies. So in New England, it's NECHI. In the western part of the US, it's WASC. And so you would have to apply to get accredited through those associations.
Okay.
And it's a good deal of work to prepare reports. And so mandating that change every 5 years means more time spent on assessment and accreditation, more resources. And at a moment when there's concern about administrative bloat and resources going to things
Right.
that aren't going to promote student success, I think this plays into that. It's wasting money that could be spent on students.
And accreditation is a big deal in the higher ed universe, in case people don't know. I mean, that is, I remember there was a college in Florida, a university in Florida, that had lost its accreditation, and it took them many years to get it back. And it does cause money for fundraising. I mean, it has a financial impact as well as other impacts that aren't as maybe perhaps as concrete.
Well, that's right, and it jeopardizes the capacity to get federal financial aid, and so it really does hurt students.
Right. I guess we just want to, I was looking on your website and I see that the AAC&U is partnering with education institutions to develop what is you're calling the truth, racial hearing. Let me start over. Truth, Racial Healing and Transformation, TRHT campus centers to, and this is lifting from your website, prepare the next generation of leaders to break down systemic racism and dismantle belief in a hierarchy of human value. Do you think you'll be coming, that'll be showing up, popping up on campus in Florida anytime soon?
It's difficult to imagine. We would welcome that. We do work with a number of campuses in Florida. We have 75 institutions now that are partnering with us on our TRHT initiatives. And it's a wide range of institutions, and it's grounded in the notion that we should be working locally to address issues of systemic racism and a belief in a hierarchy of human value. So Hamlin University, 2 miles down the road from where Philando Castile was killed, have been working on community policing with people in the area. Brown University, they've been working with Muslim communities on racial equity, particularly with Black Muslim males. We've worked with the Citadel, with Spelman, with the University of Hawaii, and they have particular concerns about the use of indigenous lands for public projects and the ways that impacts the community. And I think that the model is particularly effective because it leverages the strength of colleges and universities as anchor institutions, demonstrating that their success is inextricably linked to the psychological, social, educational, health, economic well-being of those in the communities in which they're located and those they seek to serve.
It almost seems like the leaders in Florida, a liberal arts education is being scoffed at. I remember when Governor Scott, he's now a U.S. Senator, singled out sociology as a major. Like, we don't need sociology majors. And it turned out, funnily enough, that his own daughter had majored in sociology. I'm a psych major. I've been reporting for 1,500 years. But, it is almost as if there's a disregard for liberal arts educations in general. How do we convince, you said there's no value in debating, but for parents and students, is there a heavy lift to try to persuade them that liberal arts is an education worth pursuing?
I think there is a heavy lift. Again, we have to demonstrate in our communities first that there is a sense of welcome and belonging on our college campuses, because colleges and universities have been viewed as the ivory tower, as a willful disconnect from the practical matters of everyday life. So it used to be these pastoral retreats where thinkers would go and reflect for 4 years and then become ministers or teachers. But we need to do more than that. We need to prepare students for work, citizenship, lifelong learning. And so there is skepticism. That notion that we need more welders and fewer philosophers, that we need
Right.
more engineers than anthropologists, more people in STEM than in art history, has an impact. But we know at AAC&U, we do employer surveys regularly, and we know that the skills that emerge from a liberal arts education are those that employers seek the most. The capacity to write, speak, and think with precision, coherence, and clarity, to anticipate and respond to objections, to work in diverse teams, um, to work independently. The skills, but also the mindsets matter. Employers are looking for individuals who can demonstrate resilience, adaptability, and flexibility in a world in which rapidly changing technology means rapid obsolescence. These all are products of a liberal education. And we know that over a lifetime, students who have a college degree will make $1 million more than those who just have a high school diploma. So we need to get the message out in a more compelling way. And we need to ensure that all students have access not only to higher education, but that they are supported with the tools necessary, supplied with the tools necessary for them to succeed.
Just wrapping up with you, President Pasquerella. I'm pronouncing it. I'm not butchering it, am I?
Exactly right.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks again for joining me. New college, a friend of mine's, because it's all about me. A friend of mine's grandson is currently enrolled there. His mother, her daughter, also graduated from there. Her son also graduated from there. He's a psychiatrist who was in the Navy. Her son, new college grad, served as a psychiatrist in the Navy in Gitmo and Iraq.
Mhm.
Her daughter is a tenured professor at Wake Forest as an epidemiologist. So that's what a liberal arts education will buy you at New College back in the day. um, and there's obviously a lot of concern on the part of students that they are reinventing New College in the middle of the school year with new students who've applied. They want to make it the Hillsdale of the South. Appointed as an interim president, Richard Corcoran, a very, very conservative, self described disruptor in the education um, arena. What what is the rest of the country looking at, New College in Florida and New College, and what are they thinking? What do you think?
Well, I think they're thinking that um, it's unimaginable what's happened. And yet, this isn't the first time it's happened in US history. State ordered ideology has been used to undermine the free exchange of ideas and impede the unfettered pursuit of the truth on college and university campuses in the Civil War, World War I, during the McCarthy era of the 40s and 50s, the Vietnam War, the Civil Rights Movement. Each of those provided a backdrop for attempts to rout out and dismiss faculty for political affiliations or for espousing particular ideas. Um, we've seen these issues of erosion of faculty rights, of shared governance, the capacity of students to to learn, brought up in the courts when we had loyalty oaths. And the Supreme Court ruled in the Sweezy versus New Hampshire case in 1957 that colleges and universities have a fundamental right to decide who may teach, what can be taught, who should be admitted, and how their courses should be taught. And what we're seeing is an undoing of what the courts have said is fundamental to American higher education and the preservation of academic freedom, which is central not only to higher education, but to our very democracy. And so what's happening at New College, I think, should be seen as a threat not only to our nation's historic mission of educating for democracy, but to our republic itself.
Well, thank you so much. That was a perfect place to wrap up this week's Deeper Dive podcast. Lots to chew on there. Thank you, Lynn Pasquerella, President of the American Association of Colleges and Universities. I hope you'll join us again soon.
Thank you so much.
A Deeper Dive with Dara is a podcast by City and State Florida, hosted by Dara Cam, produced by Ryan Daly, and music for the podcast was recorded by Periodic Labs LLC and performed by Ryan Daly and Danny Reyes.